I haven't had the pleasure of reading Sean's new book yet, but I did get to see the book trailer, and it promised me that it's going to be a really good read, and I was trying to think what I could do to sort of complement the tagline of love and mental illness as themes. And so I'm going to read an excerpt from a short story that I've been working on. And it's sort of, I don't know, when I wrote it, I was kind of asking myself about, I guess a question that anyone who's spent significant time on the internet has probably asked themselves. So I don't know, that might be one or two people here, which is just what do you do with a bunch of answers that aren't really answers? So what do you need to know about this? Oh, it takes place in the near future, not like a flying car future, but the couple decades from now. Isadora's father had been an acting teacher, so at first it had been hard to distinguish his changes from performance. She'd been 10 when the first worm of doubt inserted itself in her brain. Later she would think doubt was like a cancer, a thing that could copy itself and mutate. Kid, we've got to get ready, Eric Wu said. He stood in the doorway, the afternoon heat slamming into the air-conditioned coolness of their apartment. Get ready for what? She was at the dining room table, feet folded beneath her, IMing with her classmates about their extinct animals project. Isadora had fallen in love with the Samoan little dodo bird, a pigeon-like cousin of its long-extinct ancestor. It was gray with rusty wings and small black eyes. Something about its plainness and predestined doom spoke to her. A big contest, her father said. His upper lip was sweaty, his forehead glistened. Knitting. Kid, you know how to knit, right? His tone was so eager, so alarmed, that she felt guilty telling him no, of course she didn't know how to knit. It's in 14 days, he said, pulling a kitchen chair across the linoleum with a metallic screech. My dad wants to tell me something. Talk to you later, she typed. Here's what I'm thinking, Eric said in a conspiratorial whisper. We'll make a spacesuit, like astronauts used to wear. A knitted spacesuit. What's not to love? What's an astronaut again? Back when they sent manned missions into space, Eric said. He seemed anxious to get to the next part. You make the body and I'll do some thinking about the helmet. That'll be tricky. By the time her mother got home from work, Isadora had set aside the little dodo and was sketching spacesuits on her tablet. Mom, Dad, and I are going to win the knitting contest, she said. Over the years, the moment had acquired a weight it couldn't possibly have had at the time, like an extinct creature who'd been tanned and stuffed and posed. Her father, his leg bouncing beneath the table, his bent head of spiky black hair, his nervous excitement, her own excitement, her purple hand-me-down overalls, and then her mother's tired, confused frown. She'd had a long day at the high school where she studied English. She didn't really care what knitting contest. Even back then, her parents were members of a dying breed, middle-class kids who'd majored in liberal arts. Work was sporadic. They raised their only child in a valley apartment, half the size of the homes they'd grown up in. Her father eventually died without paying off his student loans. Eventually, Megan Wu did ask what knitting contest. Her dad now looked less like an inventor seized by inspiration than one of the homeless people she passed on the way to school. But her dad was unable to finish. He frowned as if searching some internal internet. There was no knitting contest. There was no spacesuit. It all sunk into the realm of legend, along with astronauts themselves. Instead, there were trips to a neurologist. There were sobbing fits and wild outbursts. When Eric had them, they were symptoms. When Megan had them, they were adjustment disorder, DSM-6, code 309.9. When Isadora had them, it was time for bed. There were white pills and yellow pills that didn't help. There was the shuffle and slur, as if you were perpetually drunk. Sometimes her mother was actually drunk. Things did not get better. Her father's mood swung further. His brain scans grew increasingly splotchy. Every test led to another test, and none of them led to a cure. It was like that book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. If you give a man a test, he will want a test for his daughter. If his daughter's test shows the same coils of DNA, she will need to make a decision about her own child, which is for it not to exist. Isadora met Domingo Allen when she was 28, out of her collegiate bucket phase and at the beginning of her curate phase. It was too late for her father, but research on the coenzyme Q10 looked promising. She ate spinach, nuts, berries, and fish, and not much else. She discovered the adulthood miracle of self-determination, her own small apartment, membership at local museums, a wrist fit that blinked encouragement at her whenever she walked up a hill or hit her omega-3 goal for the day. Domingo approached her at a Highland Park fish shop. She just purchased a fillet of salmon, an indulgence she allowed herself because it might push her disease a few months further down the timeline of her life. Her wrist fit was blinking red, which it usually only did if she ate processed meat or walked by a Zone 8 site. Was there a radon leak? Was she doing something wrong? I think it's malfunctioning, Oprah said. She turned away from the case of scales and ice. The voice, which was smooth and not quite deep, belonged to a short man with a carpet of dark stubble covering a cleft chin. He wasn't quite handsome, but he looked like he could play the pothead brother of someone handsome. Can I see? He held out his hands, waiting. She looked at the brown lines on his palms. She visited a palm reader once in college, hoping for an alternate fortune. Domingo's lifelines were long. She unfastened the wrist fit and gave it to him. She wore it all the time, even in the shower, and she thought of the dried soap in its crevices, the smell of her skin on its underside. She rubbed the smooth spot on her wrist self-consciously. He smiled, showing clean but crooked teeth. Did you think there was a nuclear meltdown in the soap shop next door? Was it that obvious? Suddenly, all her fears seemed silly. She wanted this man to gently humiliate her in this exact fashion every day. He moved a finger around the face of the device, navigating the control panel with the deftness of a pianist. That's so nice of you to help, she said. I haven't fixed it yet. In the end, he didn't. He was a low-level IT guy for a personalized ad agency, good at tinkering, but at a loss when the problem with the thing lay in its bones. Later, Isadora would worry about the metaphorical implications of this. That day in the fish store, she touched her phone to his and slid her thumb over the enable button. Her settings were such that her phone didn't transmit her genetics, just her number, her profile, and her recent views and listens. The gene share movement was just beginning then, like a cluster of cells that couldn't yet call itself a tumor. But there were people who wore their risks, cancer, arthritis, and aneurysm with defiant pride. Those people didn't have Huntington's printed on every cell, though. On their first real date, Isadora referenced a band that occupied several spots on her profile, and Domingo gave her a blank look. The standard deviations, she said. I saw them last week at a roof party. Sorry, I don't mean to be one of those people who expects you to know everything about me. But who didn't scan their date's profile? Who bothered to pretend anymore? Oh, sure, they show up in my feed sometimes, he said. I'm a nerd. I like the element of surprise, the whole in-person thing. He looked at her with his dark eyes, crinkles at the corners, and she believed he was looking at her, not the facts of her, and it felt so good she wanted to cry. There's sort of a combination of grasshop and old school scout with a garagey sound, she said. Are you Latinish? He asked. I get that a lot. It's the eyes, but no, my mom's Euro, my dad was Chinese. The was nudged the door open, but Domingo didn't ask. Then, and for years, she was grateful for his relentless attachment to the moment. Even when he did learn about her Huntington's gene, he shrugged it off. He wasn't one of those conspiracy theorists who believed genetic testing was the new opiate of the masses. He just didn't quite believe in the future. Finding such a beautiful, non-defective person who was capable of loving her seemed like proof that the coenzymes were working, that things would work in general. But then came the study that showed the enzymes only delayed onset of the disease by a few years at best. Then came a debate, followed only in the small circle of people who cared about Huntington's in the first place, over whether it should even be screened for. If there was nothing you could do, wasn't it best not to know? But I already know, Isadora wanted to scream. What about me? Thank you.